You know the hits, you know the albums, you probably still know every word. But the 1970s had another side, one that rarely gets talked about. Songs that got banned, songs built around CB radio slang, songs that slipped cannibalism past radio censors, and at least one that was literally called a novelty by the man who wrote it. These are 1970s music. 15 weird songs you didn't know. Number 15, Spirit in the Sky by Norman Greenbaum. In the spring of 1970, a song about Jesus written by a Jewish man from Massachusetts became one of the best-selling singles in the world. And Norman Greenbaum had never played gospel music in his life. Greenbaum grew up in an Orthodox Jewish household outside Boston. He had no background in gospel, no connection to Christian music. One evening, he was watching television, saw country singer Porter Wagoner performing a gospel number, and thought, I could do that. He sat down and wrote the words in about 15 minutes. The track was recorded at Coast Recorders in San Francisco in October 1969. Producer Eric Jacobson took Greenbaum's simple folk demo and built it into something entirely different. Pulsing electric guitar with a fuzz-tone circuit built directly into a Fender Telecaster, hand claps, and the gospel harmonies of the Oakland-based Stovall sisters. Reprise Records had doubts. The label was reluctant to release a 4-minute song about Jesus to pop radio. But after 2 other singles from the album underperformed, they relented. The song reached number 3 on the US Billboard Hot 100 in April 1970, topped the charts in the UK, Canada, and Australia, and sold 2 million copies in 1969 and 1970. John Lennon, in his famous 1970 Rolling Stone interview, said he liked it. Greenbaum was never able to follow it up. By the early 1970s, he had moved to Petaluma, California, where he ran a dairy farm and produced goat cheese. The song never stopped earning. It has appeared in over 30 major films, including Apollo 13, Guardians of the Galaxy, and Ocean's 11. Rolling Stone ranked it number 333 on their list of the 500 greatest songs of all time. It's gonna set me up, the spirit in the sky. Number 14, Timothy by The Boys. In 1971, a peppy brass and strings pop song climbed to number 17 on the Billboard Hot 100. It told the story of a mine collapse. 3 men went in, 2 came out. The third, Timothy, was never found. The Boys were a rock band from Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. They had a deal with Scepter Records, but the label wasn't promoting them. Timothy, Timothy. A recording engineer who believed in the band turned to songwriter Rupert Holmes, who later became famous for Escape, the Pina Colada song, and asked for help. Holmes had a solution. Write a song that would get banned. At the time, he was working on an arrangement of Tennessee Ernie Ford's 16 Tons while watching a cooking program on television. Timothy, the collision of those 2 things gave him an idea, a mine collapse and cannibalism, written clearly enough that listeners would figure it out, but vague enough to slip past censors. The song was released in December 1970 with no promotion. Radio stations slowly began to play it, then began to notice what it was about, and started banning it. But as Holmes had predicted, the more stations refused to play it, the more teenagers demanded it. By April 1971, it had peaked at number 17. Scepter Records, sensing a bigger hit, tried to claim Timothy was a mule, not a person, to get band stations to reconsider. Holmes refused. He confirmed plainly that Timothy was a man, and that they ate him. Timothy! Number 13, Popcorn by Hot Butter. The melody is instantly recognizable. Bouncy, staccato, synthetic. It sounds like something recorded recently. Gershon Kingsley wrote it in 1969. Kingsley was born in Bochum, Germany in 1922. Long before he became a pioneer of electronic music, he had earned a Tony nomination in 1958 for Broadway conducting. Then he met Robert Moog, inventor of the Moog synthesizer, bought one of the first available units for $3,500, and began experimenting. The melody that would become Popcorn came to him while listening to a popcorn machine. The name was a combination of pop for pop music and corn for kitsch. It first appeared on his 1969 album, Music to Moog By, and sat quietly for a few years. In early 1972, a promotion manager at the small Musicore label heard it and saw potential. He assembled a group of studio musicians, fronted by Stan Free, a former member of Kingsley's first Moog quartet, under the name Hot Butter. Their version became the first primarily electronic-based piece of music to reach the American popular music charts, peaking at number 9 on the Billboard Hot 100. It sold over 2 million copies globally and reached number 1 in Australia, Germany, Switzerland, Norway, and the Netherlands. It has since been covered by more than 815 artists. Number 12, Frankenstein by Edgar Winter Group. The song was 15 to 20 minutes long the first time they played it in the studio. Nobody even had a title for it. Edgar Winter had developed the central riff while playing in his brother Johnny Winter's band. He performed a version of it at Woodstock in 1969. It was a stage showcase, a chance to move between synthesizer, saxophone, and timbales while the band held the riff together. When the Edgar Winter Group brought it into the studio in 1972 for the album They Only Come Out at Night, the session turned into a long, sprawling jam. Producer Rick Derringer had to figure out how to make it usable. The editing process was extraordinary. Tape lying across chairs, draped over consoles, as the team tried to build a coherent track from dozens of takes. Drummer Chuck Ruff heard a rough mix and said, "Wow, man, it's like Frankenstein." The name stayed. The finished version ran just over 3 minutes and was initially placed as a B-side. Radio stations mostly ignored it until a few disc jockeys flipped the record over. The switchboards lit up. In May 1973, Frankenstein reached number 1 on the US Billboard Hot 100 and was certified gold by the RIAA on June 19, 1973. The album reached number 3 on the Billboard 200 and stayed on the chart for 80 weeks. Rolling Stone later listed it at number 7 on their ranking of the top 25 best rock instrumentals. Number 11, Hooked on a Feeling by Blue Swede. The song was already 6 years old when Swedish rock band Blue Swede took it to number 1 in the United States in April 1974. But the version you know sounds nothing like the original. Mark James wrote Hooked on a Feeling in 1968 for country and pop singer B.J. Thomas. Thomas's version, featuring an electric sitar played by Reggie Young, reached number 5 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1969. Soft, warm, no chanting, no ooga chaka. That part came from British singer Jonathan King, who in 1971 recorded his own cover and added a chant at the opening. A deep, repetitive vocal hook he described as a reggae rhythm delivered by male voices. Blue Swede, a rock band from Stockholm fronted by Björn Skifs, built their cover around King's version and quietly adjusted some lyrics to remove anything that could be interpreted as a drug reference. Released in the United States in February 1974, it reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 by April 6th, 9 weeks after release. It was the band's only #1. Skiffs left Blue Swede in 1975, and the group quietly dissolved. The song resurfaced in Reservoir Dogs in 1992, became attached to the internet's first viral meme via Ally McBeal in the late 1990s, and reached an entirely new generation through the Guardians of the Galaxy soundtrack in 2014. Number 10, The Streak by Ray Stevens.
Oh, yes, they call him the Streak.
By the spring of 1974, streaking, running naked through a public place, had become a genuine national craze in the United States. It was showing up at sporting events, college campuses, even the Academy Awards. Ray Stevens saw it coming. He wrote and recorded The Streak in 1974. The song is narrated by a plain-spoken man named Charlie who keeps encountering a naked streaker at public events, at a grocery store, a football game, a church service, while desperately trying to shield his wife Ethel from the spectacle.
Of his anatomy, he gon' give us a peek.
The streaker himself never says a word. Charlie does all the talking, his voice rising with alarm every time the man reappears. Stevens performed all the voices himself, including the exasperated Charlie and a deadpan news reporter. The Streak was released in March 1974 and reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, where it stayed for 3 weeks. It also topped the UK charts and became one of the biggest selling singles of the year.
If there's an audience to be found, we'll be streaking it round.
Stevens received a gold record for it. Stevens had been recording since the early 1960s and had charted with novelty songs like Ahab the Arab in 1962 and Gitterzan in 1969. But nothing connected like this. The timing was exact. The song arrived as the fad peaked, gave it a punchline, and then both faded together. The streaking craze was largely over by the end of 1974. The song had a brief second life in the UK in 1999 when it was re-released and charted again.
Who's that we? Ethel? Is that you, Ethel?
Number 9, Convoy by C.W. McCall. C.W. McCall was not a real person. The voice belonged to Bill Fries, an advertising executive in Omaha, Nebraska, who created the McCall character in 1973 to sell loaves of bread for a regional baking company. The jingles were popular enough that Fries partnered with musician Chip Davis, who would later found Mannheim Steamroller, to develop McCall into a recording artist. The songs performed modestly on the country charts. Then came Convoy. Fries got the idea while driving the interstate in 1975, listening to CB radio chatter. The country was still reeling from the 1973 oil crisis. A government-mandated 55 miles per hour speed limit had gone into effect, and truckers were furious, using CB radios to form caravans and share the locations of speed traps. Their lingo was its own language: bears for police, chicken coops for way stations, swindle sheets for falsified logbooks. He wrote the song that evening.
A breaker pig fan, this here's Duck again, and
MGM doubted the slang would translate and buried the track on an album. A few disc jockeys pulled it out anyway, and the phones lit up. Convoy spent 1 week at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1976, 6 weeks at #1 on the country charts, and sold over 2 million copies. Sam Peckinpah turned it into a 1978 film starring Chris Christopherson. Fries eventually left music, moved to Ouray, Colorado, and was elected mayor in 1986. Number 8, Afternoon Delight by Starlin Vocal Band.
Gonna Gonna find my baby, gonna hold her tight.
Bill Danoff was having lunch at Clyde's restaurant in Georgetown, Washington, D.C., when he glanced at a table tent advertising the happy hour menu. The menu was called Afternoon Delights. It listed things like spiced shrimp and hot brie with almonds. He thought it would make a good song title. Danoff, who had previously co-written Take Me Home, Country Roads with John Denver, formed the Starland Vocal Band with his wife Taffy Nivert and 2 other musicians.
And everything's a little clearer in the light of day.
Afternoon Delight reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in July 1976. Then things got strange. At the 1977 Grammy Awards, they won Best New Artist, beating out Boston, whose debut album would go on to become one of the best-selling debuts in American music history. Danoff later said, "We got Best New Artist. That was basically the kiss of death, and I feel sorry for everyone who's gotten it since."
Rockets in flight. Afternoon delight.
Then CBS gave them a variety show. The Starland Vocal Band show ran for 6 weeks in the summer of 1977. They didn't want it. Danoff told GQ that CBS liked them because they were clean cut, but the band had no idea what to do with a television program. One of the writers and regular performers on the show was a then unknown comic named David Letterman. The show was canceled. Both couples in the band later divorced. The group broke up in 1981. The song outlasted all of it.
Afternoon delight.
#7, My Ding-a-Ling by Chuck Berry. In the summer of 1972, Chuck Berry released his first and only #1 single in the United States. He had been recording since the mid-1950s. He had created Johnny B. Good, Roll Over Beethoven, Maybelline, and rock and roll music. He helped define the sound of rock and roll. His first #1 was a song about a bell.
On a string, she told me it was my ding-a-ling-a-ling.
My Ding-a-Ling was not a new song. Berry had recorded earlier versions under different titles as far back as 1952, and the original melody had been written by New Orleans musician Dave Bartholomew. Berry had been performing his own version live for years. The 1972 recording came from a concert in Coventry, England, with enthusiastic audience participation built in. It reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in November 1972 and topped the UK singles chart as well.
And they tried to teach me the golden rule.
Berry's first #1 in Britain. Critics were baffled. Rock writers who had spent years championing Berry as a foundational figure watched as a playful crowd participation novelty climbed past everything else he'd ever released. British moral campaigner Mary Whitehouse attempted to have it banned from BBC Radio on grounds of obscenity. The BBC declined. Berry himself seemed largely unbothered.
I'll sit there and play with my ding-a-ling-a-ling.
#6, Tubular Bells by Mike Oldfield. Mike Oldfield was 19 years old when he began working on the album that would become Tubular Bells. He had previously been a session musician and had worked briefly with composer Kevin Ayers. He spent months building the piece alone, playing almost every instrument himself: guitars, bass, piano, organs, bells, and percussion, overdubbing them layer by layer. Multiple record labels turned him down. Richard Branson, then running a small chain of record shops, decided to take a chance. Tubular Bells became the first release on Branson's newly formed Virgin Records label, issued in May 1973. The album reached #1 in the UK, peaked at #3 on the US Billboard 200, and eventually sold more than 15 million copies worldwide. It stayed on the UK albums chart for over 4 years. Then, in December of 1973, director William Friedkin used the opening theme in The Exorcist. A piece of instrumental music that had already sold well became one of the most unsettling sounds in cinema history. Oldfield later said the association was not something he had anticipated. The music had not been written with horror in mind. Tubular Bells is credited with saving Virgin Records in its earliest years. Number 5, Kung Fu Fighting by Carl Douglas. Kung Fu Fighting was recorded in about 10 minutes. Producer Biddu had booked studio time in London in 1974 to record a different song with Carl Douglas, a Jamaican-born singer who had been trying to break through in the British market for several years. The session went well, and there was time left over.
Everybody was kung fu fighting.
Biddu suggested they use it to lay down a quick track. Douglas had been carrying an idea based on the martial arts craze that had swept popular culture following Bruce Lee's films. Douglas wrote the words in the cab on the way to the studio. The song was released in the UK in August 1974, not as a lead single, but as a B-side. Radio stations started playing it anyway, and within weeks, it had shot to number 1 in Britain.
It was a little bit frightening.
When it reached the United States, it topped the Billboard Hot 100 in October 1974 and became one of the best-selling singles of the year, eventually moving over 10 million copies worldwide. Bruce Lee had died in July 1973, more than a year before the song was released, but the cultural wave he set in motion was still at full height. Douglas and Biddu had tapped into it almost entirely by accident. Kung Fu Fighting received a Grammy nomination for Best Rhythm and Blues Song. Number 4, The Night Chicago Died by Paper Lace.
In the heat of a summer night.
Paper Lace were a pop group from Nottingham, England. In 1974, they released a song about a dramatic night in 1920 Chicago, a massive battle between Al Capone's gang and the city police, and it went to number 1 in the United States. There is one significant problem. None of it happened. The songwriters, Mitch Murray and Peter Callander, had never been to Chicago. They had grown up watching American gangster films, and that was the extent of their research. The song sets the action on the east side of Chicago, but the east side doesn't exist in the way they imagined it.
When the town of Chicago died.
Lake Michigan sits immediately to the east of downtown. There is a neighborhood called the East Side, but it's on the far south of the city near the Indiana state line, and in the 1920s, it was a quiet residential area. When the geographic error was pointed out to Callander, his response was, "There's an east side of everywhere." Murray later admitted in a statement sent to Songfacts that Capone fighting the police was itself a fiction. The Chicago cops of that era were nearly all on Capone's payroll.
Brother, what a night it really was. Brother, what I thought it really was.
The closest real event the song resembles is the 1929 St. Valentine's Day Massacre. But in that case, it was Capone's men who disguised themselves as police and shot 7 members of a rival gang. No cops were on the other side. None of this stopped the song from reaching number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in August 1974. Paper Lace couldn't even perform it in the United States at the height of its popularity due to contractual issues. They watched it top the American charts from England.
Chicago died.
Number 3, Seasons in the Sun by Terry Jacks.
Goodbye to you, my trusted friend.
The song is a farewell. A dying man says goodbye to his father, his friend, and his wife, one verse at a time. In early 1974, It spent 3 weeks at number 1 in the United States and sold over 2 million copies in less than a month. Almost nobody had wanted to record it.
We had joy, we had fun, we had seasons in the sun.
Seasons in the Sun began as a French song called Le Moribond, written by Belgian singer-songwriter Jacques Brel in 1961. American poet Rod McEwen translated it into English, softening some of the original's darker, more sardonic elements. The Beach Boys recorded a version and shelved it. Terry Jacks, a Canadian musician who had previously been part of a pop duo called the Poppy Family, heard the Beach Boys session and decided to record his own version. Released in Canada in 1973, it shot to number 1 almost immediately.
Goodbye, Papa, it's hard to die.
The US release followed in early 1974 with the same result. It also topped charts across much of Western Europe, reaching number 1 in the UK in February 1974 and staying there for 4 weeks. Critics were unkind. The arrangement, soft, almost buoyant, with a sing-along quality, struck many as inconsistent with its subject. The cheerfulness of the melody, wrapped around lyrics about dying, felt to some like a mismatch, but the public responded in enormous numbers. Seasons in the Sun is considered one of the best-selling singles in Canadian music history and sold an estimated 14 million copies worldwide.
All our lives we had fun, we had seasons in the sun.
Number 2, Disco Duck by Rick Dees.
Went to a party the other night.
Rick Dees was a radio DJ in Memphis, Tennessee, when he wrote Disco Duck in 1976. He recorded it as a novelty track, a comedian doing a duck impression over a disco groove. His radio station was not going to play it. No major label wanted it. RSO Records eventually agreed to release it, and nobody expected much. Disco Duck went to number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in October 1976 and sold over 2 million copies in the United States. It won the Grammy for Best Comedy Recording at the 1977 ceremony, the same night that Fleetwood Mac, Linda Ronstadt, and the Eagles were among the major nominees across other categories. The song arrived at the height of disco's dominance on American radio and managed to simultaneously parody the genre and participate in it. The groove underneath was genuine disco. The duck voice riding on top of it was impossible to ignore. The combination felt absurd, but it clearly worked. RSO Records, which was also home to the Bee Gees, whose Saturday Night Fever soundtrack was about to become one of the biggest-selling albums in history, reportedly had reservations about the label's identity being split between that and a novelty duck record. Dees continued working as a radio DJ and later built a long career in broadcasting. Disco Duck remained his only major chart hit. Number 1, Werewolves of London by Warren Zevon.
I saw a werewolf with a Chinese menu in his hand.
The song started as a joke between Warren Zevon and Phil Everly of the Everly Brothers in 1975. Everly had been watching a broadcast of the 1935 film Werewolf of London and suggested to Zevon, half seriously, that he build a song around the title. Zevon brought the idea to guitarist Waddy Wachtel and bassist Leroy Marinelle. The three of them wrote the song in roughly 1 day at Marinelle's house in Venice Beach, California.
Werewolves of London.
Wachtel started howling. Zevon came up with a line about a werewolf carrying a Chinese menu through the streets of Soho. They traded ideas until they had a complete song. Jackson Browne, who was producing Zevon's albums at the time, liked it enough to perform it in his own live sets. When it came time to record Zevon's 1978 album Excitable Boy, the track proved surprisingly difficult to capture. Wachtel and Browne tried at least 7 different musician lineups before settling on Fleetwood Mac's Mick Fleetwood on drums and John McVie on bass. Washtel's guitar solo was completed in a single pass after dozens of other takes. Zevon didn't want it released as a single. He preferred other songs on the album. Asylum Records overruled him.
He's the hairy-handed gent who ran amok in Kent.
Werewolves of London reached number 21 on the Billboard Hot 100 in May 1978, his first and only top 40 hit. He later called it a dumb song for smart people, a label he seemed both amused and faintly troubled by. The song followed him the rest of his career, resurfacing in films and on television every few years. BBC Radio 2 listeners later voted it as having the best opening line of any song ever recorded. The 1970s were never just one sound. They were 15 sounds, all trying to get the needle to move. Some of these songs were written in 15 minutes. Some took years to finally reach radio. Some were banned. Some were misunderstood. And a few were exactly as strange as they appeared. And worked anyway. If you made it this far, you clearly have good taste in weird music. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want more trips through the decades that made rock and roll so hard to explain. We'll see you next time.